Keywords with Peter and Jane. 8b. The Big House. This morning there are some letters for Peter, Jane, and their father. The children like to get letters from their friends. Their mother and father help them to read some of these letters, but some others they can read on their own. Today, Jane is glad to see she has a letter from her auntie. Jane and Peter were at Auntie's house for their summer holiday. Auntie writes to thank Jane for her letter and to say that she and Uncle are well. Peter is glad to have a letter from his friend, Jack. Jack is a big boy who lives by the sea. Peter can read some of his letter, but not all of it. The two children are in the house. There's a letter for you, calls Peter to his father. He puts his father's letter on the table. The brother and sister tell their mother about the letters. She helps Jane to read some of her letter from Auntie and Uncle, and then helps Peter with his letter from his friend Jack. Father opens his letter and reads it as he sits at the table. It is a long letter from an old friend. He takes a long time to read the letter. Then he looks up to tell the others about it. I have an old friend who has a very big house, he says. His name is Mr. White. He has a big garden by his house. This old friend had to go away from his home until Christmas. He wants us to look after his house and garden when he's away. There are some birds and rabbits and fish in the garden. We would have to look after these as well as the flowers. What fun, says Peter. We'd love to help you to look after Mr. White's house and garden. It's a long time until Christmas, says Mother. We could do it, says Jane. We'd all be glad to help, he says. You two children could play in the garden, says Father. That's good of him, says Mother. Mother and Father talk some more about Mr. White's letter. Then they tell the children what they are going to look Then they tell the children that they are going to look after Mr. White's house and garden until Christmas, as he asks. You'll have to help with the work, Mother says to them. After dinner, Father says he is going to write a letter to Mr. White. He gets a pen and some ink and sits down at the table. Peter sits at the table with him. He does not use pen and ink. He wants to draw. He draws with pencils. Peter uses red, blue, green, and yellow pencils to make a picture of a garden. I've never been to Mr. White's garden, says Peter. Is it like this, Dad? His father puts the pen and ink away and looks at Peter's picture. I like your picture, he says, but Mr. White's garden is a big one. Let me use your pencils to draw it for you. He takes Peter's pencils and pens and draws. Then he says, have a look at this. The summer weather is not over. It is a lovely time of the year. The sun is out, but it is not too hot. Both the children are out with their father and mother. They are going to the shops. Peter and his father letter. Peter has his father's letter in his hand. He looks at it and tells Jane that he can read the name on it. Jane and her mother go into a shop. Mother wants to buy a new hat. As his mother and sister go into the shop, Peter tells his father that he thinks they will be a long time. We have plenty to do, says Father. First, we must send off the letter and then get some things for the garden. It's just the weather to work in the garden, says Peter. We'll give you plenty of help at Mr. White's house. Peter and his father go in and out of the shops for a long time until they have all they want. Then they go to find Mother and Jane. Father and Peter have to wait some time for Mother and Jane. Then Peter says, I can see them now. Here they are. Mother has bought a new hat. I hope you like that hat I've bought, she says. I like it, says Peter. You've found a nice one. Yes, you've picked a nice one, says Father. I think it's lovely. We both like it. Mother looks happy. A woman always likes a new hat, she says. I haven't bought another hat this year. We had to wait a long time, Peter says to Jane. It made me think you were lost. When are we going to see the big garden? asks. When are we going to see the big garden? asks Jane. Can we go today? Father says we have too much to do today. We'll go over in 2 days' time. 2 days' time. I put that in my letter to Mr. White. I want to see him before he goes away. We should have a talk before he goes. Come on now, it's 5 o'clock and time to go home. Today, Mother, Father, and the children are going by car to see Mr. White and his house and garden. It is a sunny day. What beautiful weather, says Mother, as she gets into the car. Yes, says Father, it's a lovely day to go out in the car. He tells the children the way that they will go. Soon the car is going fast along the road. It goes up over the hill and then down by the woods. After this, it goes by the farm. The children look out of the windows of the car and talk. There's the donkey, says Peter. Yes, the dear old donkey, says Jane. We must go and see him soon. Then they come to Mr. White's house. The car stops by a door in the wall. The door is closed. This is the garden door, says Father. It is a lovely sunny wall. It is yellow and there are flowers on the top of the wall. Some beautiful butterflies are by the flowers. I love butterflies, says Jane. Father and Mother go round to the other door to see Mr. White. Peter and Jane wait in the car by the door in the yellow wall. They look at this wall and at the lovely blue flowers and butterflies. The garden door has private on it. Can you read what's on the door? Peter asks Jane. Yes, it's private, she says. I can read private too, says Peter. It means people can go in only if they want to see Mr. White. Yes, says Jane. Private means that the door and the gardens are for his use only. The door is closed, but soon they can hear some people in the garden. Then the door opens and they hear their father call. Peter and Jane push the car door open, jump out, and go in the garden door. There are their father and mother with Mr. White. This is Mr. White, says Father, and here are Peter and Jane. Mr. White tells the children he is glad they want to help with the garden. Mr. White wants them to see his garden. Peter and Jane and their mother have not been there before. Come round with me, he says. I'm always happy to take people round my garden. Then you must come into the house for a cup of tea before you go back. He talks to them as he takes them round. They all stop to look at the fruit trees. We've had a lot of fruit this year, Mr. White says. We've picked some, but there's a lot to pick, as you can see. Do you like to pick fruit, Peter and Jane? Yes, we do, says Peter. I would be glad if you could pick some of this, says Mr. White. The last time I went away, the fruit was left on the trees. You may eat as much as you like and take some home with you. Thank you, says Peter. We could make some jam with it. We all like jam. Yes, and we know how to make jam, says Jane. They go on round the garden and come to a very big rabbit run. The children look for the rabbits. There aren't many here, says Jane. I can see 3, only 3. I can see the heads of 2 more. Look over there, says Peter. Some of them hide when people come to see them, says Mr. White. If you came at night, you could see a lot of them. It's a good place to keep rabbits, says Peter. They have room to run about. Yes, there's plenty of room, says Mr. White, but there's 3 of them. But 3 of them got out last week. Did any get lost? Did you get them back? Asks Peter. No, they weren't lost, says Mr. White, but it was like a game of hide and seek to get them back. I did get them in the end, but I got wet in the rain. The children want to make friends with the rabbits, and they bring them something to eat. Many fish in the water. Many fish are in the water. Peter and Jane can see a lot of them as they swim about. Peter puts his hand into the water, and one of the fish swims up to it. Look, Jane, says Peter. I think this big and black fish wants something to eat. Don't fall in, says Mother to Peter. He did fall in some water once, Jane tells Mr. White. We had to pull him out. His clothes got very wet. Never again, says Peter. I'm not going to fall in again. I'm glad to hear that, says his mother. We have no other clothes with us. I'd like to watch these fish for a long time, says Jane. I think they're beautiful. There is a book about fish at school, says Peter. I had a look at it last week. There were pictures in it of fish just like these. You can learn a lot from books, says Mr. White. I have many books about fish, flowers, rabbits, birds, and gardens. Here are my birds, says Mr. White. You have a lot of lovely birds, says Mother. I think there's nothing more beautiful than a bird. I like to hear a bird sing first thing in the morning as I get up, says Father. It makes me happy. When I hear a bird sing, it makes me want to sing too, says Jane. They can see that Mr. White loves his birds. He gives them some water to drink. The birds know him, and some of them come to him. One bird is on his hand, and another is on his head. I don't want to go away from them, he says. I think about my little friends when I'm away. I'm glad to know you'll look after them well for me. Well, give them plenty to eat and drink, says Peter. We'll give them plenty to eat and drink, says Peter. We'd better have that cup of tea now, says Mr. White. You can all come along with me up to the house. They all have seats by the windows. Windows where they can look down on the garden. The children have ice cream and the others have tea to drink. It's like a cafe up here, says Peter. Mr. White says, I like nothing better than to sit after dinner in good weather. I come out here every day when the sun is out. I can see a lot from here. There is a black and red butterfly by the flowers on the table. Peter and Jane both watch it fly about. Then it goes away. Let it fly away, says Mother. It's happy in the sun. Mr. White and Mother and Father want to talk for some time, so Mr. White asks the children if they would like to go and play in the garden. You could play hide and seek or some other game, he says. Peter and Jane want to look round the garden again. There's so much to do here, says Jane. Yes, says Peter. Let's go and look at those fish again. Peter and Jane have found some balls in a box. I know the game to play with these, says Peter. People play it in the park. Yes, says Jane. I know children play this game in the park. I saw them once. Let's play with it. Let's play it now. We can learn how to do it. They look up at Mr. White and ask him if they can use the balls for a game. Yes, says Mr. White. Go on, have some fun. We can watch you play from here. The children take some balls out of the box to play the game. Peter hits his ball, then Jane hits hers. At first, they are not very good at it. Peter hits his ball, then Jane hits hers. At first, they are not very good at it, and one of the balls is lost by some logs. They find it, then go with the game. They get better at it as they play. I like this, says Peter, but not as much as cricket. Some people say cricket is a slow game, but I don't think it's slow. Mr. White went away last week. Peter and his father are at work in the garden. There has been some bad weather, and it has made a lot of work in the garden. Peter is under a tree as he picks up some apples. Not many apples have come down from the tree. Peter picks them up and puts them in a box. He can see his father at work. A little apple falls from the tree and hits Peter on the head. He looks up and sees the cat in the tree. He calls the cat down and takes it to the house to give it something to eat. He talks to the cat. This is your dinner, he says. That's right, eat it up. The cat eats its dinner and then has a drink. Peter goes back to get the box of apples. He takes it to an old stable at the end of the garden. Mr. White keeps his car in the old stable when he is at home. The car is not in the stable now. Peter and Jane are in the old stable. There is a room over the stable, and Peter wants to get into it. I know how to get into that room, he says. Come on, Jane. Let's have a look around up there. It'll be fun. The two children get into the room. Jane opens the window so that they can see. There is a big black box in the room. What can be in there? Asks Peter. I wish we could open the box and see what's in it. He goes over to the box and has a look at it. We can open it, Jane, he says. Help me to look in here. They find a tent, some old pictures, a top hat, and a cricket bat and cap. Peter takes out the cricket bat and the cricket cap. Jane looks at the pictures. Here is one of an old queen, she says. It's our queen's grandmother. Peter takes out the top hat and puts it on. Look, Jane, he says. Peter and Jane have fun dressing up in the room over the stable. Many children like dressing up. Then they go into the house. They want to see Mr. White's books. He said, we must see the books, says Peter. I know where they are, says Jane. I know which room they're in. They find the books in a sunny room at the top of the house. What a lot they are, says Peter. Mr. White must have a lot of money to buy all these. Some may have been presents, says Jane. Many people give books for presents. They sit down in two chairs to look at some of the books. Jane has a book about butterflies. Look at this beautiful butterfly on this log, she says to Peter. It's yellow and black. Peter has a book about fish. There are some fish here like those Mr. White has, he says. I could learn a lot about fish from these pictures. The children find books about horses, motor cars, birds, and flowers. The children tell their father about Mr. White's books. Peter says he saw a very old book with Punch and Judy in it. I didn't know they had Punch and Judy in those days, says Jane. Yes, says father. Punch and Judy are very old. I saw them when I was a boy. And so did your grandfather. Have you left the books just as you found them? Asks father. Yes, says Jane. We put all the books back again. As they walk, the two children help their father to work in the garden. He tells them he wants to make a fire. He wants to make a fire and looks round for a place for it. It must be away from the birds and the trees and rabbits, he says. Then they find a good place for a fire. Peter likes to make a fire. He brings some wood for his father to put on it. Jane says, Mom saw Pam's mother the other day. She says our friend Jack wants to come to the farm for a holiday. Jack has come to Pam's farm for 2 weeks holiday. He has a friend with him, and Peter and Jane were on their own holidays by the sea. They used to talk to Jack about Pam's farm and about the good times they had there. It made Jack want to go to the farm for a holiday. Jack and his friend have come in a van. It is Jack's uncle's van. They have a tent in it. Pam's father tells them where they can put their tent. There are some logs by the barn. Pam's father tells the boys they can make a log house if they want to. Peter and Jane come up to the farm to see Jack. They talk to him about the happy days they had by the sea. I used to like going on the pier to fish, says Peter. Yes, and I like picnics on the sand, says Jane. They talk about the day they lost their kite and how Jack and his friend helped them to find it. Jack and his friend have been at the farms for some days now. They like it very much. They live in their tent. There has been no bad weather. The two boys help on the farm. They like to work out in the sun with Pam's father and his men. Peter and Jane come up to the farm again to see their friends. They ask them to make a log house. Why, asks Jack. For us to play in, says Jane. Go on, it would be fun. We'd help you. Jack and his friend like to please Peter and Jane, so they say they will make them a log house. First, Jack looks at the logs and thinks. Then he says, I know how to do it. Help me to push those big ones over there. Pam's black puppy comes up to see what is going on. He wants to play. No, says Jane to the puppy. We have work to do. Some little chicks come by and the puppy runs off after them. Jack and his friend make the log house for the children. They find an old door and put it into place. Jane wants the boys to know that she can write. She writes entrance way in on the door. When she sees this, Peter writes exit way out. Pam comes along. Has my puppy been here? She asks. Yes, says Jane. He came by here and then ran off to play with some chicks. He ran that way. I'll come with you to help to find him, if you like. Peter tells to Jack, he says, you can swim very well, and I like the way you dive into the water. I want to learn to dive like you. Can I swim a little now? Jack says, if you want to swim well, swim every day if you can. I live by the sea, so I can swim every day. Jane comes by. Pam has found her puppy. She says She plays in the log house with Peter until it is time to go home. Peter asks Jack to take him for a swim. I want to see you dive, he says. Jack asks his friend if he would like to go for a swim. Yes, says his friend. It's been very hot today. It would be nice to get into the water. Come on, says Jack. Let's get our things from the tent, and then Peter will tell us the way to go. They get into the van and go along the road. Then they get out and walk a little way. They talk as they go along. Peter tells his friends how he fell off a tree the other day and sat in the water. When I fell off, I had my clothes on. It's fun to talk about it now, he says. But as I sat in the water, I didn't like it. Soon the boys are by the water. Jack dives in. As he goes under the water, Peter thinks, I must learn to dive like that. Then Jack helps Peter to dive. The three boys like it in the water very much. Jack can swim well, and so can his friend. They see that Peter does not get into danger. One of the boys finds a big log in the water. We can have some fun with this, he says. Jack gets on the log, but he soon falls off as it goes over and over in the water. When he falls off, Jack goes under the water again. Then his friend gets on the log and Jack and Peter push him along. Let's see if all three of us can sit on the log at once, says Jack. I'll help Peter get up onto it. Peter gets up on the log. Now help me, says Jack. The other two pull him up, but the log goes over again and they all fall into the water. They play some more and then at last Jack says it is time to go back. They stop at a shop on the way back to buy some ice cream. They all played a game of cricket by the barn. Jack is by the wall with the bat. His friend has the ball first, and then Peter has it. Jack hits the ball and runs. He makes a lot of runs. Jack can play well. Jane says he hits the ball all over the place. It's going up over the trees now. Then Jack hits the ball again. It goes over the barn. The ball may be lost, calls his friend. We must all go to find it. They all go around the barn to find the ball. A man from the farm is at work there. The puppy is with him. I saw your ball come over the barn, he says. I think it's over there by the pigs. Peter runs over and finds it. Then they all go back to the game. The puppy is with them. Jane has the bat now. Every time she hits the ball, the puppy runs after it. The puppy likes to play with children. It has been lovely weather all day. There has been no rain, and the sun has been out all the time. It has been hot. Now the sun is down and the night has come. Peter and Jane are at home in bed. It's going to be a beautiful night, says Jack, but I don't want to go to bed now. Let's make a log fire, says his friend. Then I'll play and we'll both sing. Yes, says Jack. Come on, then. They make a big fire of logs. The fire is yellow and red, and the trees look black. The boys sit by the fire, and Jack sings as his friend plays. Then they both sing. The boys sing of danger at sea in bad weather. They sing about the woods in summertime, and about a man and his horse. In the farmhouse, Pam's father and mother are going to bed. Their window is open and they can hear the boys sing. They like to hear them.